Hey, what's up guys? Today we're testing out some multi-cylinder engines and making performance optimizations to Engine Simulator's new fluid simulation. Many thanks to BeamNG, Reina, Joe, Meister, and Bacteria Rancher for supporting me at the Master Mechanic level on Patreon, and Brilliant for sponsoring this video. Since you like simulations, you probably enjoy learning, and today's sponsor, Brilliant.org, is a fun and easy way to do just that. Brilliant offers a wide variety of amazing interactive courses like this one called How LLMs Work. The power of AI is kind of terrifying, but I have to admit that the technology behind LLMs, like those in ChatGPT, is very interesting, and I actually learned a lot from this course. The Brilliant interface is really polished, and it's a great way to develop a habit of learning a little each day, which I encourage everyone to do. To try all of Brilliant's features for free for 30 days, visit brilliant.org/AngeTheGreat or click on the link in the description. You'll also get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. Once again, thanks to Brilliant for sponsoring this video. Last time I talked about Engine Simulator, we simulated a two-stroke chainsaw. Up until this point, I've only simulated single-cylinder engines because they're much easier to debug, and from an audio perspective, single-cylinder configurations are probably the most difficult to simulate convincingly. There's less room for manually tampering with the sound or massaging the output audio to get a desired effect. My logic was, if the simulation can simulate one-cylinder engine sounds passably, it should definitely be able to do larger engines. Well, today we're going to be putting this theory to the test. I'm going to be writing this code in the ES3D prototype application, which I've been using as a testbed for simulation development. We can take the 4-stroke single-cylinder demonstration and duplicate it a few times using a bunch of for loops. The code quality in this prototype is not that great, so for loops spammed all over the place doesn't even look that bad. After a bit of programming, we have this, which may not look like it, but is actually a 4-cylinder engine. It's just that all of the cylinders are overlapping each other. We can add a bit of separation between the cylinders so we can see them more clearly. At this point, they all fire at the same time, which obviously isn't correct, so we need to offset the crank pins to the correct flat plane configuration and adjust the valve timing so all the cylinders fire evenly. Eventually I got it to work, but my worst fears were realized and the performance was terrible. It's far from running in real time, which is a big problem for us. Thankfully though, even though the sound was choppy, I could faintly hear a semi-decent sound in there somewhere. To address the performance, we first need to quantify exactly how bad it is. The easiest way is to render some text to the screen that shows some important performance metrics. We can use the text engine that I made while working on Steam Engine Simulator. All we need to do is port that code over to the new Vulkan game engine. I did a bit more optimization and managed to get a simple test scene running at around 4 to 4,500 frames per second. It's a bit lower here just due to the screen capture. I think there are a few additional optimizations that can be made, but maybe we'll look at those another time. The two most important values that I wanted to see were the frame rate and the real-time factor, labeled here as the computation time divided by simulation time. The value needs to be as low as possible and definitely under 100% in order to run in real time. I was surprised to see that the value is only 90%, meaning the simulation should be able to run without stuttering, but clearly it was not doing that. The low frame rate is a clue as to what the real problem is here. In the old Engine Simulator, an extremely primitive simulation loop was used. It actually ran directly in the game's main thread, along with the rendering engine and front end for the application. This is not ideal because the simulation is competing with the front end for CPU time, and there is no simulation happening while the game is drawing on the GPU, so the CPU is just sitting around doing nothing during that time. I improved this code later in Steam Engine Simulator by instead running the simulation in another thread while the GPU was rendering. At the beginning of the next frame, the main thread actually waits for the simulation to complete before starting the frame, but it was usually done before then anyway. They can't run at the same time because then you'd have two threads trying to operate on the same data, which is not allowed. It would be better if the main thread didn't need to wait, but this wasn't much of an issue in Steam Engine Simulator because the game has a simple front end, and most of the CPU time actually goes into the simulation itself. So this multi-threading scheme was primitive, but still an improvement. This also happens to be the technique that is used in this prototype that we're working on today. I refined this system further over the past few months. Instead of having only the GPU rendering and simulation code running in parallel, the game's interface and simulation run completely independently, with a thread-safe communication layer in between. Running at 2000 frames per second isn't the most productive use of GPU resources, but the point is that our main thread is now free to do a lot more processing without being slowed down by the simulation, which will fix the performance issues that we're seeing. For now though, we can work around the issue by just lowering the graphics settings, freeing up some CPU time in the main thread. This did fix the issue, but the visuals just aren't going to be as nice for this video. We can see that our real-time factor is averaging about 86%, which is a bit higher than I'd like. Just for reference, here is a similar 4-cylinder engine running in the old engine simulator at a simulation rate of 20 kHz, and the real-time factor is at around 69%. It's important to note that the new simulation is running at twice the frequency, and the fluid simulation spatial resolution is hundreds of times higher. Each 2 to 3 centimeter segment in new engine simulators tubes is more detailed than an entire tube in old engine simulator. The takeaway from this is that we're now running a more advanced simulation significantly faster than its predecessor. But even still, if we want to have any chance of simulating real engines, it needs to be even faster. My goal with Engine Simulator is to simulate a V12 with long tube headers at maximum quality on my hardware, namely the Intel i7-8700K. Right now, we're well short of the 20 or so meters of tubing that we'll need for this goal, so we need to optimize further. I started with minor changes that didn't significantly impact code readability. These were very simple things like replacing standard library calls with faster alternatives, or eliminating redundant computations. With those simple fixes, the real-time factor was brought down to around 80% for the test engine that we looked at earlier, allowing us to simulate around 7 meters of tubing. Now, the entire time that I was testing this, it seemed like 7 meters was much less than I was expecting, and didn't seem quite right. Now, if you recall, earlier in the video, I spammed for loops all over my code, which, questionable programming style aside, was perfectly fine, but one of those for loops seems to have absorbed a bit more code than it should have. I'm talking as if it was the for loop's fault here, but this was obviously 100% my fault, and the end result was that I was running the rigid body simulator 4 times per simulation step, instead of just once. This was wasting a lot of CPU time, and once this mistake was fixed, I was able to simulate an additional 2 meters of tubing, which gets us closer to our goal. The next thing I wanted to look at was limiting the amount of data moving into and out of the simulation. In order to leverage CPU vector capabilities, all of the tubes, junctions, and endpoints are actually combined into a large vectorized structure before simulation, which means that a lot of the values for the tubes get jumbled around in a complex way in memory. It doesn't help the situation that transferring data into and out of SIMD types is not cheap, so if we're constantly reading and writing, the cost will add up, slowing everything down. I found that quite a lot of the data movement actually didn't need to happen, but fixing this redundant data transfer was a bit more complicated and error-prone than I expected. But once it worked though, I was able to simulate an additional 1.5 meters of tubing. At this point, the optimizations were already getting quite complex to implement, and there weren't many simple code changes left to make. There are some cache coherency issues that I want to address, but they'll take some time to implement. Even with those changes though, it's clear that single-threaded operation will not allow us to reach our goal. The good news is that CPUs have more than one core that we can use, but the bad news is that parallelizing a fluid simulation like this while running a simulation at 44,000 iterations per second is not trivial. This was the main reason why I dismissed multithreading completely for the old engine simulator. Just the cost of synchronizing the threads would likely make a multi-threaded solution slower than a single-threaded one, and some preliminary testing seemed to agree with this prediction. I do, however, know quite a bit more about fluid simulations now, and I have written a few basic test benches that prove that multi-threading is feasible and can produce quite a performance improvement, but it's really not easy. I'll talk about it in a later video though. I was able to find a few more minor optimizations, and I maxed out at around 13 total meters of tubing. It's not bad, but a bit short of our goal. In any case, this will be enough to look at some basic examples and explore the capabilities of the simulator. I ported the vehicle simulation from old Engine Simulator and fixed a few minor audio issues so I don't assault your eardrums with too many artifacts or ear-piercing screeches. However, you will hear some audio defects in these sound clips. Try to keep in mind that this is a work in progress, and I've spent many hours listening to this simulation, so I'm very aware of its flaws and I'm actively working on them. Anyway, let's take a look at the Hayabusa that I showed some time ago in my second ever Engine Simulator video. I was not happy with this engine at all, and I could not get it to sound how I wanted. The main issue is that the simulator has a hard time with engines that have low inertia and respond quickly to throttle changes. To me, it just doesn't sound natural and immediately gives away that it's synthetic, and I always found this frustrating about the simulation. The other issue is the incessant static noise in the background when an engine is at high RPM. I'll explain in a second where this static comes from. Now let's listen to this very approximate demo that I put together in new Engine Simulator. Junctions are not supported yet, so I couldn't model the exhaust system exactly. These are technically called zoomies, and it's basically just saying that every cylinder has its own exhaust system. Anyway, this is not how most engines are in real life, so just keep that in mind. Even though I was not able to replicate the actual parameters of the engine, I think it's pretty clear that this is a major improvement from old Engine Simulator. In my opinion though, the end result is not actually the biggest achievement here, but rather how that sound was created. Old Engine Simulator is too coarse to meaningfully simulate most types of resonance and acoustics. To make up for this, it uses some light audio processing to try to recover some of the lost higher frequencies. Unfortunately, these synthetic frequencies don't have a strong basis in physical reality, so they end up sounding out of place sometimes, like the incessant static that I talked about earlier. If we disable all of this audio processing and all non-physical audio parameters, we're left with this kind of underwhelming result. You'd probably think you were being abducted by aliens if this bike pulled up next to you at a stoplight. The fact that this was always the true output of the simulation always bothered me. At the time though, I believed any kind of meaningful simulation of acoustics was not feasible in real time, and therefore these were justified compromises. Now, let's listen to the new simulation with all audio processing disabled. This is the raw, unprocessed output directly from the simulator. The only audio processing done by the new simulation is a convolution filter for ambient reverb, since simulating the environment around the engine is kind of unnecessary and a bit outside of the scope of the simulation. When comparing the output like this, I think the improvement is even more obvious. Some people were concerned that the new fluid simulation somehow sounds worse than the old one, but I think this demo conclusively shows that this is simply not the case. I know there are a few artifacts and audio glitches here and there that need to be worked out, and I will address them to the best of my ability. To me though, this new fluid simulation is definitely the way forward. The flexibility of the exhaust simulation is just not something that old Engine Simulator can compete with. For example, changing the length of the exhaust system deepens the sound in a noticeable way, whereas in old engine simulator, it doesn't. You can also add simple muffler devices to further refine the sound and make it sound more similar to what you want. Since the finite speed of sound propagation is handled naturally by the CFD model, no audio processing is necessary to support unequal length headers. In Old Engine Simulator, the effect was achieved by using a time delay audio filter rather than simulating the propagation of the sound waves through the exhaust system. Now, for the sizable part of my audience that seems to gravitate towards implausible, ridiculous, or otherwise degenerate engine creations, those are also still possible. Regarding performance, if you're still running a Core 2 Duo rig in 2024, I will tell you to seek help, but also that I understand that not everyone has a fast, expensive gaming PC, and for those people, the spatial resolution can be reduced, giving better performance at the cost of audio quality. I'd say it's still a major improvement over Old Engine Simulator though. As a final demonstration, if you or someone you know has a car that sounds like this, you can now listen to it all you want from the comfort of your own home, instead of having to drive to a Wal-Mart parking lot at 3 a.m. If you want to try out this demo yourself, I will be releasing it at some point to all my supporters on Patreon. I know my time has been split over quite a few projects and progress seems like it's been slow, but I assure you that things are always happening behind the scenes even if I'm not uploading videos, and there's a lot of content that doesn't make it into the video just because I don't have enough time, to make videos because I'm programming all day. I really want to thank all my Patreon supporters who make this project possible, and Brilliant for sponsoring this video, and thank you for watching. I'll see you all next time.